Our next session, Taking Control of Your Financial Future, is led by the wonderful partner, JP Morgan Wealth Management. We have our incredible guests, Maria Vayner and Deepti Nagulapalli, ready to share their tips on embracing our authentic selves, setting goals, and crafting a plan to help you achieve your financial dreams. Maria is the head of investments for Chase Wealth Management, National Branch, and Self-Directed. In this role, she drives strategy that focuses on serving clients' investment needs across these channels. She also leads a team that provides investment advice at scale by engaging with field leaders and advisors. Deepti is a vice president at JP Morgan Private Bank. As a behavioral science specialist in the firm's advice lab, she draws from her depth of her research background to improve the way in which people think through financial decisions so they may drive toward better outcomes. Maria and Deepti, welcome to our virtual classroom, and the floor is now yours.
Hello, everyone.
That would happen. You know, we had a freeze, we have a mute, it's all the Zoom things. Well, listen, we are so excited to be here for Amigas in Wealth. My name is Maria Vayner, as Leanne just said. I'm so excited to be joined by my partner, Deepti, who is a behavioral scientist, you guys. So like, I think my job is cool, right? CWM, head of investments and advice. Leanne kind of gave you my bio, but Deepti really has the cool job here. And so before we kind of get into what we want to talk to you all about, right, this idea of how mindsets can limit your financial future or really shape your financial future, I did want Deepti to spend a couple of minutes on what behavioral science is and how she uses it in her day-to-day, and then we'll jump right into the presentation.
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here talking about stuff like this. This is exactly the type of stuff that makes my job so fun. So thank you all for having me. So I can do a quick introduction to behavioral science, right? So you might be surprised to know that behavioral science exists at a place like JP Morgan, and it's because we care a lot about the way that our clients actually think and behave. Right. So let me back into what behavioral science is. So in general, we know that traditional economic theory, the way that we think about the way people make decisions and markets and all of the stuff, it kind of assumes that people are these kind of perfect, rational decision makers, that if you are given the right value of something, you're given the right information, you can assign the right value to information that will always make the decisions that are right for us at the right point in time. But I feel like just kind of from being humans and living our lives, we know that that's not true. Right. I often do things that I shouldn't be doing. I'm allergic to gluten, and I just went to New Orleans. I definitely ate all the bread, and I ate everything that had roux in it with the flour in it. I had an allergic reaction, but that was it. You know what I mean? I prioritize having a good time over my health. And this is something we all tend to do in general. Right. So we have all of these great intentions. We want to save money. We want to start investing. We want to start planning. We want to be green. We want to wake up every morning and work out. There's so many great intentions that we have for our lives, but following through on these intentions is actually incredibly difficult, right? And it's not because we don't want to do it. It's not because we don't think it's important. It's not because we don't have the right information. We have all of the data. We have all of these things, but time and time again, it's very difficult to kind of follow through on the goals that we set for ourselves. And so that's what behavioral science seeks to study. It seeks to understand, what is it that gets in the way of people following through on the intentions that they set for themselves. And so there's lots of different kind of tips and tricks that behavioral science has to offer. And that's what we hope to use to help our clients make better decisions, to do more of the things that they want to do, and actually make it harder for them to do the things that they don't want to do. So that's kind of the way we think about behavioral science and the way we hope to use it with the people that we work with in the branches, in the private bank, all the different parts of the company.
Absolutely. And as we're sort of drilling into that, right, this idea of like the science of behavior and bringing that back to making smart financial decisions for ourselves, right? Like Deepti, you and I were talking about this before, right? And I don't want to steal your thunder in terms of what we're going to talk about, but one of the things, just being introspective myself as a Latina, thinking about my own financial decisions, right? The financial decisions that my family has made, before that have impacted me. And really thinking about, though, like today, right? Managing our own financial decisions and what that looks like when maybe you don't have all the answers, right? One of the things that we talked about, and we're going to unpack a little bit more in this discussion today, is meeting with an advisor, right? When you meet with a wealth advisor, I could see that making some people nervous, right? Like, coming from a Puerto Rican family, my parents' first language is not English. And anytime we were like in front of anyone, right, with like some modicum of authority, right, sitting on one side of the desk, you're sitting on the other side of the desk, right, there was always this intimidation that just sort of seemed to permeate the situation. And so like sort of likening that to what happens in advisor discussions, right, is something that you and I talked about. And really for me is always rooted in, I don't want anyone to think that I'm not smart, right? And therefore I feel like I need to come with all of the answers, right? And so can you walk us through a little bit of like what that actually looks like from a behavioral science perspective and how we can maybe like push through that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I can definitely do this. And I'll say I totally relate to this feeling too, right? So I'm an immigrant myself. I moved here when I was 9 years old, and my family kind of had the same experiences. I'll just kind of talk about my background. I grew up in India, but spoke English as a second language to the point of fluency at a very early age. But I came over here and I still had to take the ESL test to just kind of prove that, I actually can speak English. Just the fact that I was speaking English wasn't enough. And so there's so many signals that we're kind of getting from all over the place that make these assumptions about who we are, right? That we might not understand the market as deeply as other people. Or, this is just a lived experience of so many people of color that we don't always feel welcome at banks. There's people who kind of may assume that we don't belong there, that we don't know how to exist in the traditional financial system, stuff like that. And there's a lot of also kind of historical distrust and mistrust that exists within communities of color towards traditional banking systems. And, these are all for good reason, right? These exist for a reason. And there's something called stereotype threat. The reason that we want to talk about this because it can actually impact the way we see ourselves. So stereotype threat is something where a part of our self-image is shaped by how other people might perceive us, right? So if we think that, other people might make this assumption that I don't really know how to start investing. Other people might assume that I don't really know how to read the stock market or how to react to the stock market in the right ways. There's all of these signals out in the world that kind of shape the perception of who we are, and that in turn impacts our own self-image, the way we think about ourselves. And the reason I wanted to bring this to the forefront is to say, this stuff does exist, but the thing that I don't want to happen is for us to internalize this stereotype threat and actually disengage from the system altogether. The way in which stereotype threat becomes dangerous is if we start to think that, oh my God, people just don't think I'm capable of this, and we start to accept that about ourselves. And then instead of actually fighting against that, what happens a lot of times is that we just disengage from the system altogether. We just, instead of actually trying to push through, we disengage because we would rather reject first than be rejected, if that makes sense. And the thing I kind of want to make clear here, right, is that thinking about money, making financial decisions is hard for everyone. It's not something that's specific to me. It's not something that's specific to people of color. Financial decision making is hard in general, and that's normal, and that is totally okay. The second thing I'll say is and Marie, I want to hear about this from you too, is that, I don't think people understand the stock market in general. Like, I actually think the more and more I work in this space, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to understand, and we shouldn't have that expectation of ourselves. And that's not what we need to get started on an investing journey or a planning journey. That stuff isn't what we need to kind of even just take that first step. But what are your thoughts and experiences? You tell me.
Absolutely. I mean, I would just kind of like, I just want to address kind of two things right off the bat, right? Like we've talked about this as well, Deepti, right? When people think of head of investments and advice for Chase Wealth Management, this face is probably not the face that they think of, right? And so from a stereotype threat perspective, I sort of carry that baggage with me, right? Anytime I walk into the room, because of unconscious bias and other things, right? And so like, to me, that really resonates because I can see that I'm the head of investments and advice, and I carry that stereotype threat with me, right? And I've been in the financial markets for 2 decades, right? I can't imagine sort of like coming in fresh. And the other thing I want to say about that though is I am the head of investments and advice for Chase Wealth Management, right? And there are women of color who are now sitting at tables that represent Latinas, like all the ones on this call, right? Or Indian women or women of color, right? And so the industry is changing. We're changing the industry, and not just you and I, Deepti, right? But all the women on this call are changing the industry by participating, to your point. We need to make sure that we're in it. And then the other thing that you said, and we're going to get into this in the next question, is there shouldn't be this expectation that when you're meeting with an advisor, you know everything about everything to do with finance. Because I'll tell you, when I go see my doctor, I'm not going in there thinking I know everything there is to know about my human body, right? This is why you are offering the service, why you're in the room, right, in the office. And I think the same applies to, you know, your financial advice and your, you know, health and wealth, if you want to think about it that way, right? And so thinking about that, right, like sort of breaking through this stereotype threat to have like a real conversation, like, you don't need to know everything, obviously, but what are some of the things that you think like we should know going into those conversations?
Yeah, and I just kind of want to second your point, right? So much kind of finger snaps to what you said before of, you know, you people like you and me are inside organizations, and we're making decisions as people of color. And so I totally understand where kind of this hesitancy or this concern might come from. And I will say that things are changing, and Maria and I are here as kind of examples of people who are inside organizations and hoping to make things better for all of us. So then to the second question of, you know, what should we kind of know to prep for these conversations? And honestly, this is kind of a very seamless transition from the keynote, Janice's point, right? So the main thing that you want to know is where you want to go. What does it mean to live a life well lived? What does that mean to you? Right? Just a different way of saying Janice's point, which is, what does abundance mindset do for you? What does it mean to live a life well lived and have this direction that you want to go in? Set a giant goal for yourself. I'll talk about, for me, for my background, I'm a part of a very big extended family on both sides of my family. One of my primary goals is to kind of be able to uplift the people in my life. I'm part of my community. I'm part of my extended family. I want to use my wealth to improve not only my life, but also the people in my community, people who have come before me, people who come after me. And as people of color, we tend to do stuff like this, right? We're very connected to our families, very connected to our communities, and we take a lot of pride in being able to lift up the people around us. And so it could even be something like that, where I just kind of go in with this notion of, you know, my family is really important to me. I want to own a home at some point, and I would like to be able to send my kids to college. It could just be these kind of big, giant goals. You don't have to know how do I get there? When do I start saving? You don't have to know these details. The initial thing you need to know is, where do you want to go? And so before you meet with your advisor, just kind of keep that in mind, right? And I'll say that having that conversation with yourself of, what does it mean to live a life well lived? This will serve you well now, but also in the future. In the future, when you're kind of trying to come up against these big decisions of, do I invest in this thing, or is this instrument right for me? Is this stock the one that I should buy? Having a direction will be your compass, right? It'll be the way that you figure out what decision to take next, because you have a general direction that you're trying to move in. So that's what I'll say for the basics of having a conversation with your advisor. I really think that that's what you need to know.
Absolutely. And you know, one thing that you said that's so important, right, to your point about aligning with what Janice said, right? This is about having a life of abundance, and what does that mean for you, which create these like big buckets that you talked about, right? These big goals. But really thinking through the timing of those as well, right? Thinking through kind of like directionally when you want to be achieving those things is also really going to help with the conversations with an advisor. Because I also want to kind of reference that, right? This isn't a one and done. This isn't like, hey, come in one time and like everything is solved, right? Like you should be sort of working through with yourself and a financial professional, if you so choose, what those goals are and what is the timing that you have to achieve those, right? So just to get a little bit more tactical in terms of, you know, what that looks like, right? I always think about it in a cash bucketing way, right? So like, what do I want to do? What are my goals? When do I want to achieve those goals? And what are those like buckets of cash or buckets of money that I'm going to need for those different things, right? Like to your point about family, right? We all, a lot of the people I'm sure on this call, including you and me, Deepti, because I know, because we've talked about it, is like we're like that sandwich generation, right? We're taking care of our parents and our families, but we're also having an eye towards our future and the future of our children if we decide to have children, right? So there's sort of like the timing goes into that as well. So just to give you guys like the real perspective for me, right? When I think about this concept of cash bucketing, there's the super long term, right? My husband and I want to retire. We're always like, you know, fantasize. We have 2 little kids, 3 and 7. And whenever like things get rough, we're like, oh my God, one day we're going to retire and it's just going to be us again, right? That's super long term. And so I know that I have some more time with those dollars, right? And when I do my next session, I think session after next with Elise, we're going to be getting a little bit more into the particulars of, you know, length of time that you have to invest your money. But then I think about my kids, right? Like I need them, I want to make sure that I can provide as much as I can for their education. That's not something that I had. My parents were really worried about putting food on the table and a roof over our heads, but that's another goal, right? Which is like, to me, more of that medium to long-term bucketing, if you will. And then you have like, I'm building a little playground for my kids in our backyard, right? That's like the 3 to 6 months money, right? Like that's the money that's like right now. You'd think it was my playground, by the way, because I think I'm more excited than they are. But so just thinking about money in those ways, right? Which is like, this is a goal, but how much time do I actually have to meet those goals, right? I think is something that, again, we've talked about and you should have in your head as you're thinking about, you know, talking to an advisor or even just thinking through making your own moneda moves, Leanne.
And I really like your point. So Maria and I talked a lot about the session, which is why I kind of know some of her tidbits already. But I'll say I loved your flossing dentist example. You should share that one.
Yeah, I'm known for my like very bizarre analogies. I hit you guys with the doctor one. But yeah, the fact of the matter is what I was saying to Deepti is like, this isn't like flossing like the day before you have a dentist appointment, right? Like this is like a checkup for your money, but you've got to be doing that work. You got to be using that water pick for like a long time so that you can have that successful dentist visit, right? And so to me, the hygiene around thinking about your financial goals so that you're ready to have substantive conversations about your wealth and your money is doing all of the hard work, right? That Janice talked about earlier as well, right? It's kind of scary to be like honest with yourself about what's important to you. You know, she also alluded to this idea that we come with sort of generational baggage, right? And so, you know, we always say money wasn't really talked about at home. I sort of joke that in my home, it wasn't talked about because we didn't have any. But, you know, I think the idea is, you know, you have to sort of be prepping for a long time and think about managing your own money in a hygiene way, right? Like this is something that's just maintenance for you and your life and your family's life.
Totally. And to your point, right? It's not a one and done. So it's not like just doing a one-time action is going to get you where you need to go. It's kind of these long repeated relationships that we have with the financial professionals that we work with that will put us on the path of like where we need to go. And so I just thought that was a great way to put it.
Well, thank you. And you know, whenever I think about, again, like I'm a wealth management geek for better or worse. And so for me, I think about, okay, you've got your cash bucketing, right? You're thinking about your goals, which by the way, are going to evolve over time, which is another reason why I think you need to sort of like have that maintenance. But then I also think about it in terms of being honest with yourself about how much risk you're willing to take, right? Janice also talked about the fact that sometimes a lot of people that, you know, have a lot of money are stressed, right? Or live a stressful life. A lot of times, you know, when we're thinking about investing, what contributes to stress is the up and down movement of those assets, right? And so like one thing that I would also encourage everyone to think about, and I'm very interested in your perspective here, Deepti, is like, and if you have any behavioral science nuggets on this one too, but this idea of like risk tolerance, right? How much volatility can you take with your money? I will say before I kind of let you give your thoughts is that goes back to the cash bucketing for me, right? If it's like money that I'm not going to touch for 20 years, I feel a little bit more comfortable. I do personally, you know, taking on a little bit more volatility with those assets than I would for my kids' playground. Like they're getting that playground on July 25th. So I can't be messing with like volatility of those dollars, right? So just risk tolerance is another thing I wanted to bring to the forefront.
Yeah, totally. And I'll say that in general, we know that people tend to be risk averse, right? We don't like taking on risk that's unnecessary. Oftentimes it makes us a little bit more conservative, a little bit more cautious about the decisions that we make. But I think this is why it's so important to work kind of holistically, like you were talking about, right? All of these things work in conjunction. So what is the goal that you want to have? What's your timeline? What do you kind of see for this being a medium term, short term, or long term goal? What type of actual timeline do you have available to you, and then thinking about risk. So the thing I'll say is that we tend to be risk averse, but think about the risk that you might be comfortable if something is a little bit longer term. Given that we tend to be very conservative, are there certain things where it's smart or it makes sense to take on a calculated risk? And that's something that your advisor could help you with, right? This is a conversation you could have with them, because if you feel very strongly don't want to take on this risk, let them know that. But on the other side, if you feel that you have some flexibility, let them know that as well, and they'll work with you very closely to figure out what the right formula is for you. And something to your early point, I just wanted to touch on, right? Money tends to make us nervous, and that's true. There's so much happening in the economy. Things are volatile, especially in the last couple of years, which is again why I kind of we all kind of keep coming back to the same point of, think about what's important to you. Because the way we tend to think about it is we can't control the markets, but we can control where we want to go. So if our needs are getting met, regardless of what's happening in the market, then we at least have that safety and security that we are going in the right direction, right? So one way to combat the volatility and the anxiety that goes with that is to think very closely about, where do you want to go? Make sure that regardless of what's happening in the market, that you're actually moving in the direction that you want to be in.
And, I think what you just said is so important. And it really goes back to confidence, right? Like when you're having these discussions, you should be confident that you know what's right for you, right? And so like that will, to your point, not only help with like, all of the options that are available to you and trying to make sure that they're the right options for you, but also like kind of ignore the noise a little bit, right? I don't want to front run my great conversation I'm about to have with Elise in a little bit, right? But we're going to be going through some of that, right? There is kind of like no perfect time to invest, to get in the markets, right? And there's a slide that we're going to go through later, right? That is like one of my favorite slides. It's like not timing the market, but time in the market, right? That's so incredibly important. But like standing in your power and your confidence, right? Like I constantly have to remind myself of that, right? I know this isn't a career conversation, but like this idea of like, what's best for you, but you're standing in your power and in your confidence, and you can sort of bring that to bear on all of it, which also helps a little bit with, the constant agita of like, are you doing the right thing? Right. Yes. At the end of the day, in my mind, if you are thinking about your wealth, if you're thinking about the future and the future of your family, and you're being intellectually and emotionally honest with yourself about those goals and how to get there, you're doing the right thing.
Exactly. And this is something that I keep having to remind myself of also is, the older we get, the more that we live our lives, like our pattern recognition gets stronger, right? From a behavioral science perspective, we know faster now what makes us uncomfortable. We know faster now what feels not right. Pay attention to that stuff, this instinct, this gut instinct. I still remember I would take tests in middle school or high school or something like that. And people always told me like, your first guess is probably right. Like if you don't know the answer on a multiple choice, they're like, your first guess is probably right. That's where that comes from. This idea of pattern recognition. You've read the materials, you know what it is. Your brain is just picking up on something faster than you're aware of. But trust your gut instinct, right? Have people double check your logic if you need help. But this idea that our pattern recognition gets stronger the older that we get and the more lived experience that we have. And so feel good about the decisions you're making, right? Something that I do when I kind of don't know what to do is I think about what decision will make me feel the most emotionally peaceful. That's one way to think about that of, is this the right decision? I don't know, but is it going to make me feel okay? If yes, then probably that's the right decision.
I love that. I'm going to take that. I'm stealing that, Deepti, all these nuggets from you. But like, yeah, this idea of, evolving too. So to your point about like our pattern recognition gets stronger as we obtain more experiences, right? As we get older, is so real, but it also speaks to like being okay with changing your mind about what your goals are, right? Like that's sort of this idea of like, as I always say, I'm entitled to change my opinion as I'm confronted with new information, right? And like being okay with that. And that doesn't mean that you were wrong before, right? I think it's
You're
something that,
adapting. It
yeah,
means you're adapting, right? And that's good. That's good too. We don't want to be victim to just kind of sticking to the first piece of information we get and then just sticking to that. The world and the experiences that you're having should shape the way you think about and make decisions. And so yes, totally. The fact that you said something at the beginning, it does not mean that you have to stay with it your whole life. Like you should be adapting to new information that we get, the way you feel about certain things because of a life experience you had. All of this stuff, it's totally normal and it's part of the equation.
yeah, absolutely. And so again, this goes back to my flossing analogy, right? That's why it's like a constant thing about sort of evaluating and reevaluating, and bringing your family along where and how it makes sense, right? I think a lot of first generation women, at least for me, right, that have sort of like, broken some of the cycles are looked upon as the authority, right? Like, oh, okay, well, Maria will know what to do, right? And so which adds another layer of pressure onto us, which can actually be counterproductive, right? Like I've always said to myself, well, if everyone's always telling you you're smart, that's a good thing, right? But I think there's sort of the other side of that, right? Which is like there's a lot of pressure on us, right? To know what to do.
There's a lot of pressure on us and it feels like we are, like we said, right? Like there's a lot of pride that comes with being able to take care of so many people around us. And there's the pressure of having to take care of so many people around us. And one thing that I love about kind of where we are right now is that there are communities of people who feel the same way, right? I think something we can confidently say is that every person on the call right now probably feels this in some way. And so there's a couple of different things we can do, right? So talking to other people, find experts that you trust their judgment, who know that that your best interest is important to them, right? Find people that you trust and you like working with and rely on them for the information that they know, their expertise, whatever. Rely on other people to be kind of other. So something that I read a little bit ago is that, when the world doesn't make sense, the thing we tend to do is we take safety in other people. And so just kind of being honest that, this is a hard space for all of us to exist and we're not used to talking about money. As women, especially, we're more uncomfortable talking about money than others, right? Women are more comfortable talking about money troubles than the things that we're good at with money. Open up, be honest. Money provokes a lot of emotions and it's okay to have positive and negative emotions. And I'll say that the most safety you can get is from community and working with people that you trust, that that you like, that have your best interest at heart. And so seek those people out.
Absolutely. And reject the ones that aren't giving you that. Right? Like, it's not always going to be one and done, right? You may meet with an advisor and that advisor might not be right for you. As you said, so much of this, as with anything else in life, is about chemistry and psychological safety, right? Like, do you feel like you can ask this person, a question that may be perceived as air quotes dumb, right? Like, is that something that you could do? So, it's all within your control. And so, before we end, I just want to like one thing that has like stuck with me and then I want your parting words, Deepti, but like one thing that's stuck with me really in the last couple of weeks as I've been thinking about this session and really just even my role in terms of imparting advice across our advisor base is like invest in yourself, right? If you invest in yourself, whether that means investing your money, investing time and trying to figure out what it is that you want, investing in building your confidence, that will help your family over time, right? Right, because Deepti, you and I talked about it, it's like, it's not really about us, it's about the family, right? But investing in yourself is really what's going to help others. So I want to thank you so much, Deepti, for being here with me. We always have a good time together. But I would love to kind of give you the last word.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say something that I've been thinking about lately, right? Is as I work with different groups of people, is this idea of, as people of color and as women, we navigate the world a little bit differently than other people. There's more that's asked of us. We have to prove our case harder. We have to communicate more effectively than others. We have to build these airtight cases for people to take us seriously, all of this type of stuff. And it's exhausting. And we've talked about like the burden and the pressure of it, right? But if you take that exact same thing, what we're doing is learning these skill sets. We are very good communicators. We're very good at building airtight cases. We're extremely compelling as storytellers. So lean in on what the journey is, right? Tell very compelling stories. All of the stuff, like the hardship that we go through, flip it around and make it useful for you. Lean in on that. We have these super strengths because of the way we go through the world. Double down on it and make sure you're getting what you deserve, right? Like the struggle is making us stronger, and I want us to take advantage of the strength that comes with us. With that.
I love it. Love it, love it. Deepti, thank you again so much for this. I'm excited to be with you all again in another session later. Back to Leanne.
Thank you so much, Maria, Deepti, and what a great session. I was serious when I said I was taking notes, and I was. So some of the things that I heard here, some of the nuggets of wisdom that you shared with us was about setting goals, setting buckets for those different buckets of money. I thought it was going to be 3, but it was actually 4 big takeaways I heard around history, the history that we come with when it comes to money, stereotype threat. That's a new term that I learned today. And that's something in Deepti that I'm going to be watching out for, not playing into any negative stereotypes, because we stand in our power in our confidence, which is takeaway number 3. And then the 4th one, which I think it might be hard for some of us to muster, that crave control, right, is being okay with changing the plan. It's like, oh, this is the plan. Now I got to stick to it. I got to see it through, right? Like it's okay to change the plan. And that is such a takeaway, even for me. So I hope that you all have been taking notes here, because these 2 incredible women shared so many useful nuggets and helpful nuggets of information.